I woke to the old house breathing wood, settling the heater, coughing wind, dragging its nails across the eaves. The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:03 a.m. I slid my feet into slippers and crept toward the hallway, more out of habit than need. At the landing, I stopped. A voice, low, confident, floated up from the kitchen. The medications are doing exactly what we wanted. She's foggy. Tomorrow I'll have her admitted. After that, I deal with Lena and we're clear. The money is ours. The kettle of my pulse hissed. I pressed my palm to the banister and leaned into the darkness, tasting metal in my mouth. Cole spoke softer than the way he did when he wanted something. No, she won't fight it. She signs whatever we put in front of her when she's confused. Paperwork's already moving. I listened to the slow, deliberate circle of his pacing against the tile. He wasn't rushing, he was savoring. The refrigerator fan hummed. A car passed on Lakeview Road. Somewhere behind me, a floorboard ticked as if keeping time with my heart. I stepped backward into my room and eased the door almost shut. His words kept leaking under it like cold air. 3 months earlier, Dr. Abel Knox had changed my blood pressure prescription. He warned me about lightheadedness and mild cognitive haze, a term I now despise. For a week, I moved through our split level like a tourist in a familiar museum, setting my glasses in the pantry, putting pepper in the sugar jar, forgetting whether I had locked the back door. I once stood in the laundry room holding a dish towel with no idea how it had gotten there. Dr. Knox called it a normal adjustment period. He wasn't wrong. The fog thinned after 2 weeks and then it was gone. But by then, Cole had discovered he preferred me blurry. At Sunday dinner, he twined his fingers around Lena's and spoke with grave concern, the kind he wore like a tailored suit. Your mom's declining faster than we expected, he said, while ladling gravy with surgical precision. We should explore memory care before something dangerous happens. I was sitting across from him, spearing green beans, turning invisible by degrees. Lena's eyes, those soft willow-colored eyes I'd loved since her first fever, flicked to me wet with worry. Do you think it's really that serious already? Mom's always been sharp. These declines accelerate, Cole replied. He cut his roast into even squares, each motion patient exact. We have to be proactive. Waiting is reckless. A routine formed. Lena, an oncology nurse, came home hollowed out from 12-hour shifts. Before she could drop her bag, Cole met her at the door with updates. Your mom left the stove on again. I found her outside in her robe at 2 a.m. She forgot the alarm code. None of it true. I hadn't cooked that day. I had walked to the roses to shoo away a deer. I had punched the code as I had every night for 6 years. Still, he wrote each incident in a little notebook and made sure Lena saw him writing. When he massaged her shoulders and murmured, I'm worried about her safety, a tiny dark star was born in me. I had the sense of standing at the lip of a clever trap and admiring its joinery. I paid attention. Cole liked symmetry routines in the mirror. Every morning at 6 he brewed coffee Lena never finished. Every morning at 7 the shower upstairs roared alive and he piped in finance podcasts about beating the market. He whistled when he was pleased with himself, the same 4 notes again and again as if he were testing a lock. On a Tuesday night the house exhaled and settled. I had almost fallen back asleep when the plumbing jittered and the fridge cycled, and then came Cole's voice from below. I cracked my door 2 finger widths. In the doorway's slice of light I could see his shadow cutting across the backsplash. She's positioned exactly where we need her, he said into his phone. Confused enough that no one will challenge the commitment, capable enough to sign. The hearing is booked for Thursday morning. Dr. Reeves owes me, he'll testify she's a danger to herself. Dr. Dalton Reeves. I wrote the name in my head the way Thomas used to first detail Cleanline. My late husband had spent 25 years wearing a badge and teaching recruits to separate what they felt from what they could prove. Listen until listening is over, he'd say. Then move. Cole laughed softly, a sound like a fingernail under paint. Lena will be devastated, but she'll accept it. She's too soft to do it herself. She'll thank me once we're past this. He paused to hear this voice on the other end. Yes, the policy is there. $2.1 million. The house is in Evelyn's name exclusively. The savings are healthy. He lowered his voice then, and I had to step closer to catch the next part. No, she can't linger in a facility. Too costly, too messy. You know how these places are. Medication mistakes, false tragic, but never suspicious. 6 months tops. 6 months. The hallway rolled. I stepped back into my room because if I didn't lie down, I would fall. The ceiling had a tiny water stain I'd been meaning to paint. It looked like an animal curled in sleep. I watched it until the shape steadied. It is a particular experience to understand that someone plans to erase you while his wife, your daughter, sleeps 5 doors away believing she is safe. It is another thing to recognize the shape of the predator and realize he believes you cannot recognize him at all. I did not sleep again. The house gentled toward morning. In the neighbor's yard, a motion light clicked off and on as if the dark were breathing. I could hear Lena's quiet snore under the hum of the heating unit. Cole moved around downstairs drawers, opening and closing the soft clink of a glass placed in the sink, the phone face down on the counter. And the clock ticked. By 6, his alarm sang through the wall. The coffee grinder screamed. The shower thundered. He whistled those 4 notes. When he came down, he wore a charcoal tie and kissed the air beside Lena's cheek as she hurried out to the garage, already late for her shift. He turned to me and put on the face he uses for salesmen, pastors, and judges. "Morning, Evelyn," he said brightly. "Any confusion today? Any dizziness?" "Some," I answered, letting my voice float a little as if I were listening to it from the end of a hallway. "That's to be expected at your age," he said, and patted my shoulder like it belonged to him. "Don't worry. We're taking good care of you." When the door closed behind Lena, his mouth relaxed. He set a glossy brochure on the table and nudged it toward me with a single finger. Sunlit stock photos of elderly people colored in the cover. "These communities are exceptional," he said. "We can get you a room this week. Everything will be handled." I traced the cheerful type with one fingernail and nodded, watching how his pupils didn't move from my face. "A confidence man will watch you the way a locksmith watches a door." "Is it expensive?" I asked. "Insurance covers most of it," he said smoothly. "Lena and I will cover the rest." A cloud passed over the kitchen windows. For a moment, the whole room dimmed, and I could almost hear Thomas saying, "Listen until listening is over, then move." I looked down at the brochure again, let my hand tremble, and folded the page in half. The paper made a small, neat sound like the first stitch in a seam. Outside the neighborhood, sparrows started up. I was awake. By mid-morning, the kitchen had the rinsed clean look it gets. After Lena leaves for her shift, 2 coffee rings on the quartz, the spoon she always forgets on the windowsill, sunlight sliding over the table like a slow coin. Cole packed his leather briefcase as if the day were a gift addressed only to him. He gave me the same cheerful smile he gives bank managers and PTA volunteers. "Try to rest," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "I'll check on you at lunch." "I'll be here," I answered, folding the dish towel once, then again so the edges met. When his car reversed down the drive, the house exhaled. I stood very still and listened to the silence the way Thomas taught me to do before making any move. Then I went to work not with speeches or threats, but with small exacting motions, the kind that leave no trace until you want them to. First, the paper bones. In the secretary desk by the window, I kept what Cole assumed were old greeting cards and recipe clippings. Between 2 birthday envelopes lay the current insurance statement, the deed, and the inventory list Thomas and I had made the spring after he retired, when we discovered we were the sort of people who wrote down where we kept spare keys. I slid each document into a manila folder and photographed the pages on the dining table the way a museum would, corners squared, shadows out. I emailed the photos to an address Cole didn't know existed, one Thomas and I had once used while planning a surprise trip for Lena. The weather had turned mean and wet. In my raincoat, I walked 2 blocks to the blue mailbox at the corner and slipped 3 stamped envelopes, inside one to myself at a P.O. box I'd kept for years, for book club exchanges, one to Unity Credit Union and one to Dr. Abel Knox. The lids thudded shut like doors on a vault. Back home, I set the kettle to boil and opened the control app for our security system. Cole liked to claim I was outside in my robe most nights. The log showed a different story backdoor, armed at 9:41 p.m., disarmed at 6:03 a.m. every day for the past 3 weeks. The door camera recorded deer at 1:13 and a neighborhood cat at 3:02, but no shuffling elderly woman in slippers. I saved a copy of the last month's activity and exported timestamps, then scrolled through the archived clips until I found what I needed me on a Tuesday, in jeans and a sweater clipping frostbitten rose canes at 6:18 p.m. daylight still in the air. I exported that too. He'd used it as one of his bedtime stories. "Don't let your feelings outrun the facts," Thomas used to say when Lena was a teenager and I'd burst into tears over curfews. I poured tea and let the cup warm my palms before I picked up the phone. Dr. Knox's receptionist knew me by voice. "Evelyn Hart, what can we do for you?" "I'd like a letter," I said. Brief. The dates of my medication adjustment, your note about potential side effects, and when you documented that, I'd stabilized. "Today, if possible." She hesitated. "Let me check with Dr. Knox." He came on the line 3 minutes later, brisk kindness wrapped around every word. "Of course," he said when I explained. "I can print it and leave it at the front desk." "I'll send a courier," I said. The courier was a neighbor's grandson with a bicycle and a lockbox backpack. He rang my doorbell at 11:52, damp hair plastered to his forehead, and pedaled away with a $5 bill tucked in his pocket. By the time the front door opened again, the house smelled of lemon oil, and the paper evidence had been returned to its drawer. Cole swept in on a draft of cold air, crowing about a productive morning. He ate a bowl of soup as if it were a performance and left his spoon clean the way he always did. When he bent to kiss my hair, I felt the smile tighten against his teeth. Be ready for some appointments this week, he said lightly. I'll handle the logistics. I trust you, I murmured, and let the words taste like chalk. After he left a second time, I called the number I hadn't used since Thomas's funeral reception, when he'd stood at the end of our driveway in a charcoal suit and ensured no one reversed over the tulips. Reed Navarro had been Thomas's last partner before he retired. He'd quit the force 2 years later and opened a hardware store out on Route 10 where he stocked hammers by weight and coffee by strength. Evelyn, he said, and the store's bell chimed bright behind his voice. You okay? I need you not to ask me that, I said. I need you to listen. At 3:15, I sat at a back table in his store's break room, which smelled of chain oil and cinnamon. Reed poured coffee into thick white mugs that used to live in the squad room. I didn't dramatize or ask for sympathy. I told him the facts. Cole's midnight call, the names he'd said the hearing set for Thursday, the money amounts like quick stones in the stream, the specific line about not letting me linger in a facility. I placed on the table the printed logs from our security system, the copies of the insurance letter and deed, and the sealed envelope the neighbor's grandson had delivered with Dr. Knox's letter inside. Reed didn't interrupt. He folded his hands and listened like Thomas did, eyes on mine, attention steady. When I finished, he sat a while longer with the quiet. Then he reached for the logs, flipped through them, and nodded once. You've got enough smoke to warrant checking the fire, he said. And you know how to keep a record. Do you have his phone? Not yet. The kettle's sound from that morning replayed in my head. But he repeats himself. He likes patterns. I have a way to see his passcode. Reed's mouth twitched. I'll pretend I didn't hear that. But if you happen to obtain written communications showing intent, keep everything in at least 3 places. One ought to be somewhere he couldn't find with a floor plan and a map of your habits. I've already mailed one set, I said. Another goes in a lockbox before dinner. He tapped the envelope with Dr. Knox's letter. This helps. I also know someone at County who serves on the emergency commitment rotation. Judge Hollis? I can't promise anything, but I can make a call about making sure protocols are observed and nobody shortcuts due process because a son-in-law is persuasive. Thank you, I said, and meant it in a way that loosened something tight in my ribs. Outside, the rain had thinned to a sullen mist. I drove to Unity Credit Union and sat with a woman named Dell who wore a sweater the color of spearmint. The words I used were old-fashioned beneficiary payable on death trust. I signed my name in the places I was told and arranged the sort of automatic payments that keep a house fed and warm even if a person is waylaid. Dell asked if everything was all right at home. I smiled the way women learn to smile when a question is both kind and unhelpful. At the pharmacy, I waited until the tech called my name and then asked for a printout of my prescriptions and dispensing dates for the last 2 months. Just for my files, I said. The clerk handed them over. The dates shone up at me like metal. My blood pressure refill had been on time. There were no changes. But a separate receipt contained a compound I had not been prescribed tiny quantities cash purchase picked up by C. Hart. In our household, only Lena and I were Harts by name. Cole liked to sign guest books and waiting lists with whatever name let him slide past lines. I stood by the magazine rack and photographed the receipts with the same careful rectangles I'd used for the deed. Then I flipped through a glossy catalog until my pulse slowed. By late afternoon, I was back in the kitchen, hands steady as I arranged silverware in the drawer. The front door opened on a draft, and the cold came in with Cole. He was buoyant alert, as if he'd spent the day closing circles. He put his phone and keys on the counter beside the cutting board the way he always did, placed screen up so he could pretend not to be watching it. Then he set the music speaker to something that sounded like money counting itself. Big day tomorrow, he said, making a show of checking his watch. I booked an evaluation 10 a.m., Midtown Clinic. After that, there's a quick stop at the courthouse to file some things. Don't worry about the details. I rinsed salad greens. I never worry about details, I said, and let him hear what he wanted to hear. Dinner was a stage set, roast chicken, a candle. Lena's laugh, trying so hard to be normal, it came out thin at the edges. Cole refilled her wine as if he were generous and not simply hopeful. When she went upstairs to shower, he cleared the plates with enviable efficiency and wiped the table to a shine. He hummed those 4 notes again, satisfied with the sound of himself. I should shower, he said, stretching in the doorway. Long day. I'll put on the kettle, I answered, and lifted 2 mugs from the shelf. My hands did not tremble. When he was up the stairs, the music from his speaker followed him. Water hit tile. Steam began to thread down the hallway like ribbon. I waited 20 seconds more, then crossed to the counter and picked up his phone. The glass was smudged with fingerprints, the case pristine. Cole thinks mirrors are for him. He adjusts his tie in the microwave door every morning and tucks his shirt with the oven's glass as his accomplice. Weeks ago, I'd stood quietly by the fridge and watched his passcode bloom twice in reflection, 1979. Year of his favorite car, the one he tells stories about as if horsepower were a virtue. I entered the numbers. The phone unlocked. I took a breath that felt like a step onto ice and opened messages. D. Reeves sat at the top. Delivery confirmed. Onset window 4872H, adjust depending on caffeine intake. Excellent. Spouse works nights this week, minimal oversight. Petition accepted under emergency risk provision. Signatures ready. Hollis is on rotation. Understood. Next phase requires patience. Appearance of natural course is essential. Below another thread labeled L. Baxter, a name I didn't recognize, held screenshots of forms for a temporary surrogate designation and notes about asset consolidation. I photographed everything as it was, no cropping, no beautifying date and time visible in the banner. The call log showed 4 late-night conversations with Reeves in the last week, 2 longer than 20 minutes. I captured those too. Yay. Upstairs, the water cut off. I locked the phone and set it back exactly where it had been, aligning it with the chopping board's edge the way he likes. Steam drifted down the stairwell, carrying the scent of his body wash ocean. Something expensive. I placed the kettle on the burner and let it begin its small rattling talk. When Lena came down in her robe, her wet hair combed straight, the room looked as it always did. Teacups, a cookie plate, the box of chamomile she buys for me, even though I prefer black. She kissed my cheek. You okay, Mom? I'm fine, I said, and this time the word had weight. How was the floor tonight? She leaned against the counter and told me about a woman who refused to sleep and insisted on showing everyone pictures of her dog in a Halloween cape. Lena's face softened when she talks about patients as if she can carry their pain without breaking it. I listened and nodded and asked questions in the right places. When Cole came down in a towel to ask for a clean one, I handed it to him without flinching. He smiled. Don't stay up too late, he said to Lena, kissing her temple. To me, brush your teeth after tea. You forget and it's not good for your gum. Thank you, I said. I'll try to remember. After the dishes, I took the thumb drive from inside the flour tin and slid it into the slot of the little laptop on the buffet. Photos copied over one after another, deed logs, receipts, messages, call history. The folder names looked ordinary grocery yard books. I ejected the drive and sealed it inside a plain envelope, which I slid under the bottom drawer of the old cedar chest, the one Cole never touches because it smells like mothballs and Thomas. At 10:08 p.m., my phone buzzed. A number I didn't know sent a single line, the judge understands. Read, cautious as ever. I turned the screen face down and let my eyes close for a count of 5. The house quieted itself. The refrigerator sighed. Somewhere on the block, a dog barked twice and gave up. Lena's lamp clicked off. I sat at the kitchen table with the brochure Cole had pushed at me, earlier the one with the happy seniors and the watercolor sunsets. I opened it to the fine print and read the entering criteria, the clause about temporary emergency placement when the patient presents imminent risk, the lines about the absence of appeal within 72 hours. I folded the page again just once and set it on the placemat. The fold was straight, my hand was steady. The date on the calendar above the desk read Wednesday in tidy block letters. The square for Thursday had a dental appointment we had forgotten to cancel after Thomas died. I erased it with my thumb until the paper smudged gray. Night leaned in against the windows. A train far off took a breath and let it go. On the counter, the phone Cole loved lay black and heavy and blank. Upstairs, water ticked in the pipes as heat moved through them. I turned off the light and went to bed. The hearing time was fixed. The rest of the house kept breathing. Morning came sharp as glass. The windows held a pale light that made the kitchen look rinsed and exact, the sort of light that admits no smudges, no excuses. The calendar over the desk read Thursday. In the square where Thomas's dental appointment used to be, the paper was rubbed thin where I'd erased it. At 6, the grinder screamed. At 7, the shower upstairs began its thunder. Cole whistled those 4 notes as he went. The speaker on the counter spilled a man's voice talking about yield curves and disciplined exits. I rinsed 2 mugs I didn't need and set them, one white, one blue, on the mat by the sink. Then I dried my hands and sent a single text to a number that had rung only 3 times since Thomas died. Now. The reply came fast, on the way. I unlocked the front door and left it on the latch. The house felt like a held breath. Lena's car was gone. She had left before dawn to cover an early admission on her ward. Cole had been in a cheerful theater the night before about an evaluation at 10 and a quick stop after the way people say quick when they mean permanent. The doorbell sounded at 7:18. I let them in. Reed Navarro filled the doorway without needing to try. His hair had gone steel at the temples and his hands were still the big, precise hands that had known how to maneuver a bleeding man into the back of a cruiser without jarring a broken rib. With him came a woman in a dark jacket with a badge clipped inside. For the lapel, Detective Mara Dalrymple, County Major Crimes, and a second detective I didn't know, tall and pale and watchful, Emmett Pike. Their body cameras blinked blue. They moved soft, efficient, fitting themselves into my narrow hallway as if they had done this in houses both grand and mean. I signed the consent form. Detective Dalrymple offered permission to record inside my home, permission to observe, permission to collect what I had to give. She spoke in the even quiet voice of someone who spends most of her workday trying not to wake babies or startle dogs. "We're here to talk Ms. Hart. If Mr. Cole Hart, makes statements voluntarily, we'll document them. If he asks for an attorney, we'll stop talking and switch to paperwork." "He won't ask," Reed said. "He likes his own voice." Dalrymple's mouth didn't change, but something like agreement moved behind her eyes. She pointed to the hallway runner, and Emmett knelt to tape a small microphone under the lip of the console table. Another went under the chair rail opposite the bathroom door. They didn't set a trap. They arranged a room for a conversation that would be hard to misremember later. Upstairs, the water hit tile. The old house carried sound the way it carried heat, reluctantly, and then all at once. I walked 3 steps and rested my palm against the edge of the bathroom door. Thomas had installed an exterior privacy latch 10 summers ago when our grandson had discovered the joy of twisting knobs and locking himself into places he didn't know how to leave. The latch was simple and unlovely, 2 inches of brushed steel, 1 screw slightly stripped where a nephew had hung on it. I slid it across. The sound it made was no louder than the click of a good pen. I went to the linen closet and took out a towel, thick and white. "Cole," I called up, letting my voice carry lightly. "Do you need a towel?" "Forgot one," he sang back. "Please, the notes bouncing off tile. Bring it in." "The door's stuck," I said, pitching a touch of surprise into the words. "1 second." The water cut off. Steam began threading out from under the sill, smelling faintly of salt, and a cologne that thought of itself as an ocean. "Evelyn." The cheer edged, "Open the door." I set the towel on the hallway chair and stepped back so he wouldn't see my face when he put his eye to the keyhole. "It's that old latch again," I said. "Give me a minute." Dalrymple stood at the top of the stairs, badge, visible stance open. "Mr. Hart," her voice carried just enough. "Detective Dalrymple County Major Crimes. We'd like to speak with you about some concerns. You're not under arrest at this moment. We'd appreciate your cooperation." The silence on the other side had the quality of a held breath switching to calculation. "What's this?" he said mildly. The mildness rang false against the echoing tile. "What detective did my mother-in-law call you?" "She's confused." "Whole lot of paranoia. It's sad. If you'll give me a moment to put on some clothes, I'll meet you downstairs and we can clear up whatever ridiculous—" "We'll wait right here," Dalrymple said. "You can dry off. We'll hand you a towel through the gap. We're recording for everyone's clarity." He laughed once close to the door, dry as paper. "Recording." "Are you serious in my home?" "It's Ms. Hart's home," Emmett said. His tone had the smoothness of someone explaining a return policy. She gave consent. "Evelyn," he called, and this time the using of my name felt like a hand closing. "Open the door. We have a big morning. You don't want to be late." "Big morning." A phrase without a subject. I raised my eyebrows at Dalrymple. She didn't move. "Cole," I said, letting my voice go orotund-airy the way he prefers it. "We need to talk about the medicine." "Which medicine?" he asked, too quick. "The one Dr. Reeves delivered," I said. On the landing, Reed rested his forearm against the wall, as if to suggest to the house that it keep standing. "Who?" Cole said. And there it was, the first bump, the first hairline crack. "I don't know any Reeves." "In your messages," I said, "you call him D. Reeves. You thanked him for the delivery and asked about the onset window depending on caffeine intake. You discussed something about emergency risk and signatures ready. A judge on rotation. The towel inside slid against the floor. Then the sound of a palm against wood, not hard enough to bruise, just enough to feel. "You've gone through my phone," he said, and the mask fell for a single syllable before he found it again. He tried indifference. "Of course you did. You're ill. Paranoia makes people invade privacy. This is exactly why we need an evaluation this morning. Your privacy will be addressed when we have a warrant for the device," Dalrymple said. "Right now, we're here to make sure nobody is in danger. Mr. Hart, would you like to make a statement?" "I want to make statement." He laughed again, louder, as if volume could do what evidence couldn't. "My statement is that my wife's elderly mother is confused and inventing things she sees in reflections in daytime TV. She broke the lock, apparently. I need a towel." I picked up the towel and slid a corner under the door. His fingers took it. A moment later, he tried the knob again and told the house in his best conversational tone, "This is absurd. Lena will be devastated that her mother called the police to stage a scene. Evelyn, you're embarrassing yourself." Reed dialed. He held his phone to his ear for a count of 5. "Lena," he said when she answered. "You need to come to the house." "No, she's safe. It's about Cole. Come now." He listened and then added, "Bring your badge out of habit." Of course she didn't have one. She had a hospital ID on a blue lanyard and a habit of believing people could be convinced by clarity. Dalrymple's body cam blinked its small blue eye. Emmett checked the hallway mic and gave a tiny nod. We stood in the narrow space between our bedrooms and our lives in the door. Mr. Hart, Dalrymple said as plainly as a weather report, "We have documentation indicating you obtained substances not prescribed to Ms. Hart, and communication suggesting you were altering what she consumed. We have logs showing the home remained secured during times you claimed she wandered. We have proof you scheduled an emergency commitment hearing. We need to make sure no one is harmed in the process of whatever you intended to do this morning." "You have nothing," he said. "What you have is an old woman with high blood pressure who took a pill and now thinks she's Nancy Drew." He chuckled to himself at his own line. "Open the door." I would have expected anger. He went to something colder, the tone that had convinced Lena to sign the Jeep title into both their names, the tone that sold a mortgage refinance on the promise of lower payments. "Evelyn, listen to me. We have to go, or they'll reschedule the evaluation and you'll get worse. You don't want that. You don't want Lena to see you like this forever. You've been placing small doses of a sedative compound into Ms. Hart's morning coffee," Emmett said. "We have a witness at the pharmacy who remembers you picking up the packets in cash. We'll be following up." "Coffee." He made a sound between a scoff and a laugh. "She can't drink black coffee without sweetener. Check the sugar jar. She switches the labels herself to keep me on my toes." He liked to prod to make people defend the wrong details. Boots sounded on the porch. Reed went down to the front door and opened it for Lena. She came in fast, cheeks flamed by the cold, her scrubs under a winter coat hair dragged into a clip that had given up. She saw the badges, the tape under the chair rail, the towel on the floor, and she looked immediately at me, not at Cole, which I will remember as long as I have a brain. "Mom," she said. "I'm fine," I said. "Come up." She took the stairs like they were an IV pole she needed to catch. "What's happening?" "Ask your husband," Reed said softer than I'd expected. Lena, Cole called, and the rehearsal was back in his voice. "Thank God. Your mother's having one of her episodes. She called the police. She thinks I can't even repeat it. Unlock the door, please." Lena stood halfway between me and the door, a person bisected by a hallway. Her eyes shifted between us, taking in details the way she does when 3 machines alarm at once and the family wants to know if a man will ever breathe without help again. "Mom," she asked, "is this what we talked about, the evaluation?" I handed her the manila folder I'd kept under the sink drawer since yesterday. It held the printed messages, the pharmacy receipts, the security logs, and Dr. Knox's letter. She took it the way she takes a newborn, with both hands, with care. At first, she didn't read. She just looked. The way one looks at the ocean from a pier, taking the scale before the motion. Then she set her feet wider on the hall runner and began with the letter, because language from a doctor can land where family can't. Her eyes moved left to right, left to right. Her breathing changed. "Lena, don't," Cole said softly. "Not like this. They have no context. Everything looks bad out of context." She opened the pharmacy receipt next. She pressed a finger to the place where it said cash purchase. She tilted the paper so the light caught the name. C. Hart. Her mouth moved around the letter C as if it might become some kinder, smaller shape. It didn't. "Those are mine," he said through the door, and then he realized he had said it. "I mean, they're not hers. The compound is for... Look, we have a cat," that he had tried the cat the other day to explain a missing vase. He was not quick on his feet when the ground moved. She went to the messages. She did not skim. Lena reads like a nurse, thoroughly, with triage. She read the line about delivery confirmed. She read the one about emergency risk. She read the one about signatures. Then she stopped and put the folder against the wall and closed her eyes. When she opened them, the person who had believed the best explanation, because it had been easier, was gone. What the hospital asks of you every day teaches a person to shut a door inside and keep working. She shut it now. She looked at me. I nodded because there was nothing to add, and because she was the one who needed to say the next thing. "Cole," she said, "open the door." "Finally," he said with a little gust of triumphant air. "See, you know your mother. She..." "I want to look you in the face," she said, and every word was a step. "I want to look at your mouth when you tell me what you poured into her coffee." "Lena," he said, and he tried to reach for a tenderness he had imitated for years. It sounded like a recording of a song he had never learned the words to. "You're exhausted. They've confused you. Reeves is a consultant. Reeves isn't licensed in this state," Dalrymple said. "We've already contacted the medical board. He's not walking into any clinic this morning with anything signed that will hold for more than an hour." "Ridiculous," he snapped. His voice went brittle. "You people are overreaching. You have no idea who you're messing with, what we can do in this county." He tried the knob again and then tried his weight. The old door held on the latch. Emmett's hand hovered in case the screw stripped. Reed stayed loose, ready to keep the hallway from narrowing from an argument to a struggle. "Cole," Lena said, "what did you plan for my mother?" Silence again, then the scrape of a towel against a tile floor. When he finally spoke, he went for logic and landed in cruelty. She's 70, he said. She forgets things. She wanders. She's a hazard. You work all the time. We can't keep spending our lives caretaking a woman who is on her way out. You and I deserve. He heard himself and stopped a half beat too late. Deserve what Lena asked. He didn't answer. The hallway filled with the small sound of water ticking down the heating pipes. Dalrymple's tone did not change. Mr. Hart, please step back from the door. We're going to open it. You will be offered the opportunity to dress. Then we will continue this conversation downstairs. If you attempt to impede us or destroy evidence, we will place you in cuffs for safety. Evidence, he spat. What evidence? Blank paper and a jealous old widow. I'm going to sue this department into a broom closet. Emmett nodded at me. I slid the latch. The door opened on steam and a man wrapped in a towel jaw set, eyes bright with fury and a hit of grievance that looked like it had been rehearsed in the mirror. He flinched at the sight of the badge as if it were light too bright from an unexpected window. Get dressed, Dalrymple said. Bedroom now. Officer Pike will stand in the doorway. Ms. Hart will wait at the threshold. He brushed past me without looking and went into the bedroom. The room's neatness made him look like a smudge. Emmett turned around to face the hall, arms loose at his sides, and stared at the family photos hung there, the kind everyone has. Lena with front teeth missing. Thomas in a camp chair, my mother in a dress she sewed herself. The house came back to itself slowly, one object at a time, as if inventorying what remained. Cole dressed. He chose a tie. He combed his hair. When he turned, he smiled with his teeth. Detective, he said, tone cordial, as if inviting her to sit for a donor lunch. Shall we? We went downstairs. The kitchen claimed us as rooms do when they have seen enough. Dalrymple sat where Thomas had always sat and placed a small recorder on the table, though the body cam kept its blue metronome. Emmett stood at the archway to the living room. Reed leaned on the counter, hands flat. State your name, Dalrymple said. He did. Do you understand you are speaking to law enforcement voluntarily? I do, he said, and shot me a look that intended to say, see, I am calm and you are embarrassing. Did you obtain any medication not prescribed to Ms. Hart from a third party in the last month? No. Did you add anything to her morning beverage without her knowledge? No. Have you scheduled an evaluation for Ms. Hart today at Midtown Clinic? Yes, he said smoothly, for her safety and ours. Is there an emergency commitment petition pending in county? I believe so, he said. There are forms, our family doctor advised. Our family doctor did not, I said. He turned to Lena for support and found her looking at the receipt with C. Hart on it. It is a particular kind of quiet when a person recognizes himself on paper because the letters are his and he cannot borrow anyone else's. Cole, she said, don't lie. He spread his hands. We were overwhelmed. She was getting worse. I did what families do when they face hard realities. I asked for help. What did you ask Reeves to deliver? Dalrymple asked. He closed his mouth and shrugged. Indifferent. Sophisticated. A man too weary to engage. Mr. Hart, Emmett said, tone nearly friendly. Here's the part where you'll later wish you'd said nothing at all. Take that gift and stop. He couldn't. Some people cannot leave a thing alone if it glitters. He leaned forward, conspiratorial. Do you know how many elderly patients decline in facility care? It's not a crime to accept the curve, detective. It's humane. Everyone's happier when difficult chapters are shortened. Lena made a noise I had only ever heard her make when a code was called on a child. Dalrymple's hand came up, palm open, not to stop Lena, but to put a shape in the air that reminded us all of the outline of the room. That's enough, she said. Mr. Hart, stand up. He laughed again, thin and high, now that air had found a new place in his chest. On what basis? On the basis that we have sufficient cause to believe you conspired to commit fraud and to harm Ms. Hart, she said. Hands behind you. He looked at me then, for the first time in the morning, not as an obstacle or a problem to be solved, but as a person who had stopped his day from becoming what he had arranged it to be. What lived on his face was not rage. It was disbelief, the rotten surprise of someone whose reflection had refused to behave. Emmett moved neatly, a step, a turn, a click. Metal kissed bone. Cole inhaled sharply as if the handcuffs had shocked him. Lena, he said, twisting enough to find her, and the mask was entirely gone now. Tell them to stop. Tell them your mother is making this up. We have a mortgage together. We have my mother, she said. We have our names. We have a house we can sell. He searched her face for the old version of her that had accepted a version of everything that kept him warm. He didn't find it. He tried one more angle meaner because it had always worked on people with softer throats. She won't live forever anyway, he said. Do you think you can carry her until... Lena stepped back as if the words could stain. Reed opened the door. The day outside had brightened in the uncommitted way February days do, in Ohio, light without warmth, sky without certainty. The neighbor's maple showed small red buds that believed in a future anyway. Dalrymple guided Cole through the doorway and down the steps. Emmett went behind one hand near the shoulder blade in a posture that says, this is logistics, not a victory. At the threshold, Cole turned his head toward me and tried to make his eyes plead. Evelyn, he said. I closed the door. The house exhaled. Steam lifted from the tea kettle I had never turned on. The towel at the top of the stairs cooled through its dampness, moving into the air until there was nothing left to give. In the silence that followed, Lena sat in Thomas's chair and put her hands flat on the table like a person who has decided not to faint. Reed stood at the sink and ran water into a glass and set it in front of her without comment. I picked up the brochure Cole had pushed at me 2 days ago and dropped it into the recycling bin. The cheerful seniors smiled at their watercolor sunset once and then disappeared under a cereal box. Lena picked up the folder again as if to make sure the words hadn't altered themselves. She looked at me over the top of the papers. What had settled on her face wasn't relief. It was the hollowed-out calm I had seen after nights at the hospital, when no one had died but 2 had tried. I took the chair opposite her and wrapped my fingers around the blue mug I hadn't needed this morning. The house, so noisy with water and voices an hour earlier, listened for us. Okay, she said. It wasn't a plan and it wasn't forgiveness. It was a fact in a kitchen that had held a lot of them. She nodded once to herself as much as to me and breathed in through her nose like a nurse steadying a hand before a needle. The front room's clock ticked. Outside, a train let a long breath go. The day moved forward whether we came with it or not. I looked at my daughter's face and saw both versions of her before and after, occupying the same bones, and I found that I could hold both without breaking. After they took him, the house remembered how to be quiet. Reed stayed long enough to walk the rooms with me the way Thomas used to after a storm, checking for leaks you couldn't hear until they ruined the ceiling. He photographed the taped mics, gathered them gently, signed them into a canvas bag. Detective Dalrymple filled out a no-contact form and read it aloud so Lena could hear the words on the page in her own voice. When they left the front door shut with the soft finality of a book closing, we moved without ceremony. Lena made eggs neither of us wanted. I watered the violet that always pretends to die in February. The kettle finally boiled. I forgot to pour. When I did drink, the tea had gone lukewarm, perfectly ordinary, which felt like a kind of blessing. By noon, Reed called Cole, was booked conspiracy attempted poisoning elder abuse fraud. A magistrate signed the temporary order within the hour. Patrol served a warrant at Reeves's office. Drawers opened onto white envelopes. A laptop yielded messages without putting up a fight. Nothing theatrical, just paper finding its level. In the days that followed, we did the business of a life interrupted. Lena packed 2 bags from the master bedroom and left the rest. She moved into the room at the back of the house with the window that faces the maple and slept like a person who had run a race in her lungs. She filed for a temporary separation and then a divorce. I changed the alarm code to a sequence that meant nothing to anyone but Thomas and me. I asked Dell at the credit union to add 1 more layer to the things that needed guarding. She wore another green sweater and didn't ask why. The kitchen learned our new pattern. In the mornings, Lena took her coffee black for a week, then quietly set the sugar back on the table. She kept her lanyard in her pocket instead of around her neck because a plastic card can feel heavier than it looks. When she left for the hospital, she squeezed my shoulder the way she squeezes a patient's hand during a painful dressing change, just a second longer than necessary, just long enough to say I am here without saying anything at all. Court moved at the speed of paper. There was an arraignment in a room that smelled of old wood and cold air. Cole wore a suit that read as penitent if you didn't know him. He pled not guilty and stared at the table as the prosecutor read the charges. Reeves pled to lesser counts in exchange for cooperation and surrendered his license. The medical board clerk took it as if it were a library card someone had held too long. Wordless process can have a kind of mercy to it. Spring tugged at the yard. I cut back the roses to the 5th bud and found green under what had looked dead. A neighbor left a casserole anonymously, as if kindness works better when it doesn't have to look you in the eye. The lock Thomas installed at the bathroom stayed. I oiled the track and polished the plate and decided it would be there for grandchildren hands and not for men who think a latch guarantees an outcome. Lena began seeing Dr. Varela, a therapist, in a small brick building by the river where the waiting room has a fountain that makes a sound like a throat clearing itself before it speaks. She went twice a week at first, then weekly. It was work, not a miracle. Sometimes she came home quiet. Sometimes she cooked too much food and sent containers to 3 neighbors. Sometimes she cried without needing a reason. We sat on the back steps and watched the maple leaf out and talked about nothing, an elderly dog who limped to the corner and back every day, new paint on the blue house 2 doors down, a blue jay who bullied the sparrows and then startled at his own reflection in the window. The trial came in June on a week so hot the courthouse held its breath. I carried a sweater anyway. Courtrooms always keep winter. The pews filled with the low hum of people who meant well, who'd read things in the paper and wanted to see a story land. Cole sat with his attorneys, clean and newly humble the way you are when image has no more use. When he turned and saw us, something moved across his face that looked like confusion, as if the version of the world where everything belonged to him kept insisting on being real. I did not take the stand for long. The prosecutor asked about side effects the week of fog the way it lifted. I told them only what they needed and no more. Dr. Knox's letter spoke for itself. The pharmacy tech testified about cash and quantities, gave the kind of detail juries understand: a gray cap on a white vial, a receipt that doesn't go through insurance, a signature in a practiced hand. Emmett played the body cam audio. The jury heard the hall talk back our morning to them, a house narrating what it had been forced to hold. Reeves, soft-spoken and smaller than I expected, described sourcing and dosage like measurements in a recipe a decent person wouldn't bake. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. The jury didn't need days. They filed out, filed in, and spoke the single word that resets a room. Sentencing came later, 28 to 35, for coal tampering stacked with conspiracy and fraud. Eligibility for parole, a number far enough away to make the math feel like someone else's. 12 for Reeves, and the board posted the notice about his license where the coffee machine can read it. We walked out into heat that felt like a hand on the back, steering us forward. Reed shook Thomas's handshake into my palm and told Lena he'd be around if she wanted him to carry heavy things from the master closet. She nodded and said yes, but not today. Not today turned into a season. Summer made everything louder and easier to hear. We ate peaches over the sink and let the juice run without apologizing. I replaced the kettle with one that whistles because a whistle can cut through a mind. Wandering down at hallways, it doesn't need to walk anymore. The calendar filled itself the honest way. Dental mammogram, Lily's third grade recital, Lena's night shift schedule in pencil with erasures and arrows where kindness paid for itself. The newspaper ran a short follow-up with our names spelled correctly. A few letters came to my P.O. box from strangers who had mothers or fathers, or aunts who had worn a version of the same danger. I answered some, not all, and put the rest in a folder that said correspondence in a tidy hand that used to be Thomas's when we shared lists. On a Saturday in August, we lifted the cedar chest so I could sweep beneath it. The envelope under the drawer, the one with photographs and logs and copies, had gathered dust along the edge like a shoreline. I held it a moment and then pushed it back into the dim, because keeping is sometimes an action, not a fear. Lena found an apartment near the river with windows that catch western light. We painted one wall a color called hummingbird that looked nothing like a bird, and exactly like the inside of a pear. She moved in with 3 boxes of clothes, a lamp, and the conviction that a bed can be made in the middle of a room and count as a beginning. She kept a key to the house without saying anything ceremonial about it. On her first night there, she called to tell me the fountain outside Dr. Varela's office sounds different when you hear it after 9 p.m. Like a person clearing their throat and then deciding not to speak. Autumn returned us to sweaters and the smell of something baking, just because the oven warms a room in a way a heater can't. I wrote a note to the clerk asking to be notified if any hearing dates changed, then made soup and left half on Reed's back steps, a repayable debt I planned not to repay evenly. At dusk, I walked the block where Thomas and I had walked and waved to neighbors who pretended not to watch over me in case I didn't want to be seen. The roses put out a second stubborn flush in October, as if they had decided to be a little foolish on purpose. I cut 3 and set them in the blue glass vase on the kitchen table beside the calendar. The square for Thursday held only a note in pencil bulbs with Lena before first frost. The paper buckled slightly where an older erasure had scarred it. The graphite line sat clean beside it. I stood at the sink and listened to the new kettle sing. In the hallway, the bathroom latch slid in its track when I touched it, obedient and ordinary. Outside, a train took a long breath and let it go. The house held. I poured the water and watched the steam rise until it thinned into the air and disappeared. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.